there, and thank you for making the Perpetual podcast a part of your day. I'm Danielle Zapchenk. You know, when we get to hear people's stories, it really opens up our eyes to better understand each other. Through their life experience, they give us a perspective we wouldn't ever even know for ourselves. I'm grateful for my friend Beka Joy Hull, who walked us through her journey of navigating mental health, plus wrestling with the Christian faith. Is it even real? And finding peace with all of it.
I would say you can't quit your life, so I didn't. I just acted like everything was fine. Some people knew it wasn't, some people did, but I sat with the Lord, argued with the Lord, told the Lord he was not real. So trying to take myself back to that place when I didn't believe the Lord was real. I was also in not just depressed, but a very depressed state. I would wake up every morning and ask myself, do you hate your life? And I would say yes.
Here's my conversation with Beka Joy Hull. Beka Joy Hull, welcome to the Perpetual podcast. You are a writer, speaker, consultant, and I had the pleasure of meeting you a while back, and I'd have to say you were a joy to meet. And also, you are such a gifted speaker. You had a lot to say and all worthy, so thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. I'm super thrilled, honored, all those good things. It's always fun to get to talk to a friend and also, talk about Jesus.
Beka, you are in Dallas, Texas. Can you tell me a little bit about what has been the best part of your week so far?
The best part of my week, honestly, taking naps. I work for myself, and so I feel really lucky, really blessed that when my body, so I have a lot of health issues. So when my body's tired, I just take a nap. I don't have to call my boss. I don't have to take time off work. I'm like, oh, I'm tired. And I take a nap. And that's it. That's the whole thing.
You know, sometimes when people ask that question, even when I go to our chiropractor, they're like, how's your week? My brain completely just I don't know. I can't think of anything. And sometimes it's the simplest things like taking naps. So
that was the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah. Have you always lived in the Dallas area, or where'd you grow up?
I have not. So I grew up in a super small town. If you're familiar with small towns, I like to say the size is we have a Walmart and nothing else. Small town people understand what that means. So I grew up in a small town called Jennings, Louisiana, with a Walmart. And then I moved to Dallas, Fort Worth for college, which was now 15 years ago. And then most of the time have lived here, did 1 year on the mission field, and then also did 2 years living in Chicago. But I really consider Dallas my home base now. When I say hey, I'm going to go home, I'm going to Dallas.
I didn't grow up in a super small town, but I grew up in an area where there are a lot of cows. And so people always said, so did you have a cow? And I'm like, no, I did not. So it's funny how we reference, it had a Walmart. So we're going somewhere.
It had nothing else, but it was the town that everyone else had to go to go to Walmart.
You know, it's an up and coming space, I'm sure. So you said you were on the mission field for a year. Is that something that you always wanted to do, or is that something that just popped up in your life?
No, that was very much, honestly, I thought that would be my career. So I actually went to college to be a missionary. That was the long-term plan. I felt called to ministry when I was right about 16 at a summer youth conference. And at that point, that was definitely the point in my life where I was like, okay, Jesus, you can do anything you want. That has not always been my favorite decision in life. Sometimes I would call it a really bad one. So that led me to go to Bible college, graduate, ended up spending a year on the mission field. And actually, when I got back, I was like, Jesus, all right, I'm ready. Where are we going? I'm never coming back. And just very, very clearly from the Lord, felt like he said, you're going to stay in America. And he said, I don't think you understood that I just went to Bible college for 4 years and now you're telling me not to go overseas. But God's goodness is in that, and there's reasons for that now that I understand. But at 22, I was just a little 22, 23. I was like, not so much.
Yeah, I think that's hard when you have, I don't know if it's a mindset that we have our whole lives or when we're younger. We're like, this is what's going to happen in our life. And it doesn't really always work like that, does it? You're right. Hindsight is 20/20, and you can see the bigger picture in the end. You're like, obviously your plan is always better. So
yeah, but I never think that in the moment, ever.
Yeah. No. And even when I realize that, you're right. Time and time again, I do the same thing. I still wonder and question, and I don't know. It's human nature.
That's what we do.
You started your own business, I think. Was it in 2020 or was it before that?
2021. We're not even, me. I do have a business partner, but we're not even a year in. I think it's been about 8-9 months. Both of us really just taking a leap of faith into business and marketing consulting for businesses. And really both of us feel and have been involved in ministry for a really long time. So for us, our consulting work is actually the method that allows us to do ministry because it's work that we enjoy and really brings us life. But then it also, honestly, it funds all the other things that we do because our income and our ministry don't have to be intertwined, which is what works for us. And that's how God lined it up. And so we pray before we start all of our work meetings because we haven't gone and sought out one client. Every single client has found us. And we know that. And we know that the Lord brought them to us. And the fact that he just keeps throwing clients at us and we can pay our bills and thrive and we're about to hire someone, we're like, we didn't do any of this. We're just showing up and doing our best.
Was that a process to start your own business or was that something like, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to start?
No, I just jumped in. There's been 2 times in my life that I felt very led that God was asking me to do a very specific thing. One of them was when I went on the mission field and I did the world race in 2012. And I knew that it was what God was asking me to do, and saying no would mean that I was saying no to what God wanted for me. And that's okay. But I was like, we're going to do it. And then the second time was when I felt led to start this business. It was that same really deep feeling. I had no savings. I had no plan, nothing. I was a month and a half out from being done at my job because I felt like the Lord was saying it was time to move on. There was some unhealthy work dynamics there. And my mental health and my health is always my number one priority. So I was like, it's been fun. We're out. And started looking for a job. And then the Lord was like, no, you're not going to get another job. I said, I don't think you understand how this works. I have to pay my bills. So we're not doing this. He goes, no, you're going to start your own business. I was like, I don't have a business plan. He's like, yeah, it's fine. I was like, no, it's not. And he's like, I'll work it out. And sure enough, about a month later, so 2 weeks out from not having a job, the Lord dropped 3 clients in me and my friend Jen's lap. And that replaced my entire income for the rest of the year, only working 10 hours a week. So I was making the same amount of money, working 10 hours a week with 3 clients that found us. In 1 week, I did that. And I was like, I guess we're doing this.
Looking back on it now, obviously that was just a quick startup. It all worked out. Is there something that you have learned from starting your own business? If somebody's thinking of kind of shifting and doing that same thing, is there any insight that you could give them, either good or negative? Because I think it's all usable.
It is. I actually wish there was. People ask me, how did you start your own business? And I literally say what I just told you. I'm like, I don't really know. I think for me, it was just the next step of faith. And that happened to be what God was asking of me. I think our relationship with God is very hyper specific. And I have those gut feelings, those large moments where I just know God's asking me to do something. And so for me, when I have those moments, I want and know that I'm going to say yes. And so at that point, not saying my brain shuts off, but my brain's like, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do it anyway. And that really was just, okay, I'm going to say yes to this. And it was scary. And it's still scary because there isn't a direct deposit paycheck every 2 weeks. But it's been an exercise of faith. And actually, maybe the encouragement could be when you step into this is God's really reawakened my childlike faith through doing this, because it really does come down to the paycheck. And I hate continuing talking about money, but it's if there's going to be money in my bank account, it's because God's going to put money in my bank account. I can do everything or nothing. And it's just been watching God show up. And the way that I've gotten to see God show up in my life, in my work, financially, relationally, with my ministry, with writing, with speaking, everything has really exploded since I made that yes. It was God was saying hey, I need you to make this yes so I can give you all the rest. But that first yes was the scariest. And so it's one of those things of there's good things on the other side of those really scary yeses, whether that's starting a business, whether that's doing a project, whether that's dating someone. There's good things on the other side of those really scary yeses. And I think, actually, I know in my life, I've made a lot of those. And so for me, it was more like he had like prepared me. Like I had a lot of practice in saying those yeses. So when it was a big yes, like saying goodbye to a salary, I was like, okay, well, like I've practiced for this. So, okay, we're going to do it. We'll see what happens. But he had prepared me for my whole adult life to be able to make that yes and it not be, I'm not going to say devastating, but not be the scariest thing in the world. I was like, all right, well, it'll work out, even if I end up walking dogs, whatever.
Yeah, it's hard to take that leap. And you're right. I think it has to be a practice, a muscle that's used over time. Because if that's something we initially start, I mean, even when we have practice, or maybe it's sore, it takes some time to stretch it out. So this podcast is all about people's stories. I love the way that Jesus shares parables. It's simple. It's very specific. And I think there's this relatable lesson. So Beka, what is your parable story that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, per usual, I always like to have things like really neat and tidy. Like, I know why, because I want to present myself really well. The reality is, like, life is messy. Following God is messy. And so what God really put on my heart to talk about was this journey. And I'm still really learning how to tell this part of my story, is the journey from when I first experienced like my first mental health struggle, which would have been at the end of college. The long journey I had to actually getting properly diagnosed and finding healing and health, because that's a 10-year span. But when it goes back to it, I mentioned earlier that I felt called to ministry, or what I like to say to wrap it up into a more easy to understand package is, like, I said God could do anything in my life. A lot of times, especially historically, that's meant the vocational call to ministry. Really, that's just, okay, Jesus, you're in the driver's seat, consequences be damned, here we go. And so with that, going to Bible college, doing missions. When I was in my 20s, I kept finding myself in these repeated cycles of struggle, and not little struggle, like I can't get out of bed, I can't function, major depression, anxiety, heartbreak, financial issues, health issues. It really felt like every other year, something significant was happening in my life where people around me, elders at my church, everyone was like, what is going on? Like every time it felt like I got 2 steps forward, I would get 57 steps back. And so the Bible character that I related most to is Job. Me and Job, BFFs, they're like, oh, Beka, life's not that bad. And I'm like, this. They go, oh, yeah, that kind of sucks. I'm like, yeah, it does kind of suck. So through these things, like, honestly, as I was joking, but not joking earlier, like I would call following Jesus like the best, worst decision of my life. I'd be like, yeah, follow Jesus. Be careful, because one day he's going to screw you over, but it's totally fine. Beka, why do you follow God? I don't know. I know that he's real, but I don't know if he likes me all the time. Genuinely, that is how I felt. But I knew God was real. I went through a season of not believing in God in college when I initially was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, was taking Bible classes and didn't believe God was real, and would be like, wow, the apostles are dumb. They died for no reason. Like, this was my legitimate thought process. I was an intern at a church, and I would like get up and teach the lesson on Sunday because I didn't tell a lot of people, because mental health wasn't talked as much about then. I didn't know anything about it. I was really ashamed. I was just really embarrassed. I was barely surviving. And I would get up and I would teach lessons to middle schoolers. And after, I would feel guilty for lying to them. Be like, wow, man, I suck, but I got to do my job. Like, I got to pay my bills. So through that, unfortunately, that was not the only time where I felt like God just wasn't there. It goes back to when I was a teenager and I initially got diagnosed with severe scoliosis, really questioning like, hey, God, why did you make me broken? Wearing a back brace for 2 years, being in chronic pain, dealing through all that. So then when I got through to college, went through this major mental health episode, again, those same questions, God, like, are you there? Are you actually good? Why would you allow this? But then, of course, after that, seeing the goodness of God as I began healing, goodness of God through therapy, and being like, oh, okay, God's working in this. I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I don't think that's biblical. I think God can bring good out of everything. And I think he is good. So I started to see this. One of the main reasons I ended up on the mission field was because in retrospect, that was healing for me. I spent a solid year of my life struggling just to function. And then God's grace to me was to let me go to the mission field. And maybe that sounds really weird, but my only job, because I wasn't in leadership for the first time in my adult life, my only job was to show up every day and do what I was told. I had no responsibilities besides doing what I was told. And I was always in leadership. I was always leading clubs and ministries and youth group and go, go, go. I'm an overachiever. Okay. Like I was a valedictorian. I'm quintessential. If it's there, I'm going to do it. So getting to just sit with the Lord for a whole year was so healing. But of course, if I go back to when he asked me to go, he was like, hey, I want you to go do this. And I was like, no. It was the world race. And so you live out of a backpack for a year. I think I'd been camping one time. I had never put on a backpack. Like I went to REI to try on packs with a dress and sandals on. My biggest qualm with leaving was I couldn't take my shoes with me. Like this is the level of girly we're talking. And so people are like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, no. They're like, then why are you? I think God wants me to. What if he doesn't? Hope he doesn't send the money so I can't go. That would be great because I don't really want to. Over and over and over again, as I joke about this, but this was the reoccurring pattern in my life. I don't want to go to Guatemala where I interned. Oh, I went to Guatemala. I don't want to go to Dallas Christian College. Guess what? I went to Dallas Christian College. I don't want to do the world race. Guess what? I did the world race. I don't want to fall in love and then him dump me and not marry me. Oh, that happened too. I don't want to have chronic health issues. Oh, there you go. And so it was just ongoing cycle of always feeling like I was just trying to keep floating, just trying to make it. So trying to bring that all the way into how God showed up, even though he did the whole time, is that this pattern kept happening until I finally felt like I had reached a good point. Like I was at a job that I loved. After being sick for 8 months, I'd finally gotten a clean bill of health, like so sick that I couldn't climb up a flight of stairs without getting winded and having to lay down after. While I was in that state physically, like I was also running a gym and teaching fitness classes. So imagine barely being able to go up a flight of stairs and then having to teach a fitness class where you're required to talk for the entire 50 minutes of the class and your body is breaking down. So going through that, really difficult. But again, the goodness of God, found out that I had gluten intolerance, found out that I had these underlying infections, got healthy. Like I felt better than I had my whole life. So I had spent years in counseling. I had gotten through all these health things. I was moving forward. I loved my job. Finally gotten over a really bad breakup. Like things were kicking good. And then it got worse than ever. At that point, this was 4 years ago now, right after I got that clean bill of health, I turned 29. And then a few weeks later, unfortunately, like I said, everything exploded and I was assaulted by someone that I met online dating. I think not the hard part, but I wish I could say like, man, that was really hard and that was difficult. But I worked through that trauma and moved on. I wish that was the whole story. And I know, Danielle, you've heard a little bit about this, is like, that was just the starting point of what would become 3 months of living in a manic state. One, I didn't know anything about what mania was. If you have mania, you have bipolar disorder. That's the diagnosis I finally heard a couple months later. I basically destroyed my life because I was in a state of not thinking clearly. I even hit psychosis, which is like a whole different level. But I actually lost my mind because someone assaulted me and the trauma set that off. So then I spent all my money. I lost the job that I loved. I lost a lot of my community that I poured a lot of my life into. I lost my apartment, just everything. And so when I finally came out of this state of mania, it felt like I was waking up into my own personal nightmare. And I was like, I couldn't get out of it. I was just stuck. And so in that's when I got the diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder and really thought that my life was over because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that you could be healthy because I saw what was in the media. I heard stories and I was like, wow, no one's going to want to be with me. No one's going to want to give me a job. I can't have a family. Like I just believed all of these things. And I was like, cool. Well, this whole life that I've worked really, really hard, because as I said, I'd gone through several seasons of just trying to get over this and just trying to get over this. And I was like, I don't have anything left. Like we're done. Like I can't keep going. But the cool part was and how God, of course, comes in is about 8 months after that all started. So I had come down from being manic. I had moved to Illinois because I have great friends who were like, we just bought a house, we have a spare room, and you don't have a place to live. And I said, praise the Lord, I'm coming. I had never gone to Illinois. I did not know how to live in winter. And all of a sudden I lived in Illinois, outside of Chicago, but got the medication, got the treatment. And I was sitting in my psychiatrist's office. And this was the point where all of those other things clicked in, because up until this point, I truly believed that I was really bad at life, because I would watch my friends, my family, my peers go through things, and it would take me much longer to process them. It would take me more energy. Like in the time it took me to get over a serious breakup, I watched someone get divorced, date, and get remarried. And I was still trying to process this breakup. I was like, okay, I just feel a lot. Like this is just who I am, or I'm just not as good at life as everybody else. And I honestly had a very negative image because I could see that I was struggling, but you can't measure emotions. So I was just like, I just suck. Great. So then I was sitting in my psychiatrist's office and I just looked at him and I go, do people feel like this all the time? He goes, what do you mean? And I was like, well, before my brain was like tossing and turning all the time, but I didn't know that because that's all I knew. And then I looked at him and he goes, well, what does it feel like now? And I just went, and it was completely calm. And he goes, yeah, people feel like that all the time. And I go, shut the front door. This is so much more doable than I was like, I figured it out. Like, this is the magic key. This is what the Lord wanted for me, was like, I did not know that I was living in a perpetual state of anxiety and stress and trauma. And my brain was just constantly overworking. So then all of a sudden I went back, and instead of going, man, I suck, I went back and I go, dang girl, look at you. You graduated from college. You had successful jobs. You have good relationships. You are killing it. You are walking around life with 1,000-pound boulder on your back, just trying to like scrape your way like through the valley, get yourself up the mountain while everyone else didn't have that on them. And you were trying to keep up. Now I'm like, damn girl, you so strong, you so brave, like, look at you. And seeing the Lord's goodness through all of that, like, why did I go to the mission field? Well, because that would have potentially caused me to have a manic episode on a long-term mission field. That could have destroyed my ministry. That could have destroyed my reputation. That could have destroyed all of the funding and the trust that people had in me. Why didn't I get married in my mid-20s? Well, I could have hurt my children. I could have had to go through a divorce, because that's really common after someone gets diagnosed with this. And so I can go back now and I'm like, wow, all of those times that I would have sworn on a stack of Bibles that the Lord hated me. Like, he was in every single moment of it, to where now I'm like, life is so sweet now. And it's sweet because my diagnosis was the final puzzle piece.
Beka, thank you for taking us on that journey, being vulnerable enough to share about the trauma that you experienced, and also just what you were saying, the puzzle pieces. I loved what you said about the boulder on your back, because I think there's so many of us walking around just frustrated and not understanding there is this missing puzzle piece that maybe we need to figure out. I would have to say this, to be honest, like mental health, like what you were saying, like that wasn't a big deal or something that was talked about, probably even taboo really to talk about for a long time. So you grew up and you went to a Christian church, you went to a Christian Bible school. Was that just something that you just didn't want to even explore? Or were you were thinking like, I just have to struggle through this. This is just normal life.
I didn't know anything about mental health. So I didn't even know I was struggling until I had my boss set me down and he goes, hey, I don't think you're okay. I went, oh, I'm fine, as I'm like in tears. I'm like, life is just really hard right now. And he's like, you're not okay. And he graciously, and this will sound slightly extreme, but he knew what he needed to do to make sure I got help. And he just said, hey, either you get help or I'm going to fire you. And I was like, and I was 20. I was like, okay, I'll go get help. I wasn't going to argue. I was on my own since I was 18. My parents are older, so they raised me more. Hey, you're 18, you're an adult. Go get him. So I had to figure it out. I was like, okay, guess I'm going to go to therapy. And I mean, that moment, and he knows this, I still go to that church. Like, he's the campus pastor now. That moment changed my life. And it was such a gift. I didn't talk about it after that because I had shame. Like, I didn't understand it. It wasn't as talked about as much. There was still a lot of stigma, I think way more stigma associated with it at that time. And I was just embarrassed because I thought it was my fault. And it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't.
If we have somebody in our life, one that is struggling, they necessarily, and we're not here to diagnose anyone, or if somebody comes to us and says, you know, I am bipolar, I have this manic, what's the best response for us as friends and humans, as Christians, to love them well through this time of their life?
That's a loaded question. The first thing is and this is what my community did for me, was they loved me right where I was. They accepted me, but they also helped me to find acceptance. And so with that, I think the other thing that's important is especially what I would consider a more serious diagnosis. I am not a psychology professional. If I'm saying anything wrong, nobody come at me. But there's a difference between depression and anxiety and bipolar or schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder. There's a gap of knowledge and of understanding. And so the next thing besides creating a safe space is just listen. The greatest thing that my friends and people as I've met after I felt free, compelled, strong enough to talk about it openly, because I talk about it like I'm getting a cheeseburger or like I went and got shoes at the mall. Like, I try to talk about it in that manner to normalize it because it's normal. A lot of people have bipolar disorder that don't talk about it because of the stigma, because of the you're crazy, you're not reliable, you're not dependable. And please hear me say this. If you're not properly treated and you're not taking care of yourself, you can absolutely be all of those things. But what tends to happen from what I've seen is people who are managing it really well don't talk about it because there's a stigma, and people who aren't managing it really well are the only people you hear about. When the reality is there are tons of extremely successful people that have bipolar disorder that you would never know because they run large companies. They are presidents, they are actors, they are actresses, because it doesn't affect their day-to-day life. And so the other thing with bipolar disorder specifically, as I understand it, is it's a spectrum disorder. So there's a really broad range of symptoms of things that you would deal with as someone with this disorder, because there's also two types. So sitting and loving them and also listening and also not making assumptions, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. It's not uncommon when I talk about it to get a reaction like this. You have bipolar disorder? Yeah, but you're so normal. And I'm like, I am. See, we're all going to be okay. Like, it's not voodoo. It's not taboo. Like, no one's like, oh, I'm so ashamed that I have high blood pressure, or I'm so ashamed that I have diabetes. Are there holistic ways to treat it? Totally. Pro counseling? Yes. I'm also pro meds. I'm pro a lot of things, but it's not something that I let people shame me over or even perpetuate that, because I'm like, you're not going to look at anybody twice for that. So why would you look at me differently for something that is physical? I did not pick. Trust me, I would never pick this situation. I would not wish this on anyone. But really, when it comes down to it, the easiest understanding of bipolar that I've read and that I share with people is, if your body is a house and your emotions are the thermostat, when your house gets too hot, your air turns on. And when your house gets too cold, your heat turns on, right? So your house is equipped to self-regulate the temperature. So with bipolar disorder, my thermostat is just broken. So if it gets too hot, my body is incapable of bringing me back to center. If it gets too cold, so depressed, it's incapable of bringing me back to center. So the holistic care that I have, including counseling, medication, diet, sleep, exercise, all of the things that I've learned and that I've had professionals help me to incorporate into my life, those are the things that help my body to regulate my emotions. And so therefore, it doesn't become this giant thing because I have all of the tools that I need to be healthy. And so in that, getting to talk about that health is something I feel really led to do. Not that it's the only thing I talk about in my ministry or when I preach, but it's saying like, hey, I know what it's like to struggle, and not struggle for a year or 2 years, 8, 10 years of continually struggling and not knowing why, and still showing up saying like, hey, it can get better. And that's the thing, is believing for that person, to bring it all the way back around, believing for that person that it can get better. It could look like a lot of things, but it can get better.
Beka, thank you for explaining that. I think that's why stories matter. We need to listen to people, like you just said, because it just gives me like a whole better perspective of how to love people well and better understand. It's just like once you, like, if you have, like what you're saying, somebody who has cancer, somebody who has diabetes, somebody who has asthma, to understand what they go through on a day-to-day, it helps you love them better, to help watch out for them. So I appreciate that. Take me back to when you were talking about you were leading your youth group and you were not believing anything that you were thinking about Jesus. It's just amazing that like Jesus allowed you to be in this state of just like wonder and worry and questioning and like, I don't believe this, but yet he still used all of it. So tell me, like, how did you like change that mindset of being like, this isn't real and the disciples were wrong to, okay, I actually do believe this. What flipped for you?
Oh, I had an encounter with God. I was, of course, still in Bible college. I was still working at a church. I would say you can't quit your life, so I didn't. I just acted like everything was fine. Some people knew it wasn't, some people did, whatever. But I sat with the Lord, argued with the Lord, told the Lord he was not real. When I didn't believe the Lord was real, I was also in not just depressed, but a very depressed state. Like I could not physically get out of bed in the morning. I would wake up every morning and ask myself the same question. Do you hate your life? And I would say yes. And it was for the first time I couldn't choose how I felt. I couldn't choose to find the positivity. It just was. And I had no frame of reference for that because I am naturally a relatively optimistic person. Now I'm relatively optimistic with a lot of honesty, which that can go to a lot of places. But I was used to like, okay, just power through. And I'd wake up every day and I'd go, Beka, do you hate your life? And I would say yes. I went from, like I mentioned, I think being the valedictorian in high school to my cognitive ability was so low that I could not read a piece of paper and retain it or tell you what I read 2 seconds later. So being in that state of mind, one, I went to therapy. I love therapy. And two, I think the Lord was gracious to me because that's when my faith changed from what I was told growing up to what I knew in my heart. I grew up in the church, so thankful. Like I was in the womb, in church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday youth group, like those doors were open, we were in the building. But it was what I was told. And that was when it went like, do I really, truly believe this stuff? And some people would call it a dark season of the night. So people would refer to some of what I went through as deconstruction of just saying like, hey, some of these beliefs that I've built, they don't hold up. It doesn't mean that God's not real. They just don't hold up. And so I was able to start getting through the weeds of what is God and what isn't God. And so I needed to believe that he was a load of crap because when I came back, I believed it because I knew it in my heart and my soul. And also like when people see me, they can make a lot of assumptions, especially when I was younger, like, oh, you're this and you're that, and you've never gone through anything difficult and things have always been easy. And I'm like, I wish I would love that story. But I can say like, hey, like I've gone through a season where I thought God wasn't real, where all of it was fake. And they're like, really? And it's those moments, whether it's talking about when I would have considered myself an atheist or talking about when again and again, I felt like the Lord had really, truly abandoned me. That's when I'm able to create those safe places with people and that care and that respect that I wouldn't understand or know how to navigate unless I had been there myself. So I came back to the Lord because I ended up at a Phil Wickham concert. And after 3 to 4 months, I had not felt the Lord. All the things I already said. And it was a Christmas concert and I like Christmas music. And somebody invited me last minute and I was sitting there like, whatever, I like Christmas music. God's not real. It's fine. And during that time, and I actually still love it's Phil Wickham and Shane. They still do the concert. I still go almost every year because that's where I met the Lord again. And his peace just rested on me in like this very tangible way. And I just heard for the first time in months, and maybe in a way that I never had before, I'm here and I'm real. And the next morning I woke up and I did the same thing I'd been doing every morning. Beka, do you hate your life? And I said, no. And that was when the game changed and I was able to start coming out of the fog. And that little bit of hope is what helped me to take another step and another step, because then I could hold on to the Lord, even though I didn't understand it and I hated it. but I knew that the Lord was real, and that was enough to keep me going.
It's really good, Beka. Thank you for being so brave and just sharing, honestly, what the Christian life is like. It's not sunshine and roses. It's hard. It's really hard. And so I appreciate when people like you share your story in a vulnerable way. I'm grateful for that. You had this sweet little post that you put up on Instagram, and it was just simply, it said, cheering people on is free. And I love that. I love that so much. Is there somebody that has been a cheerleader for you in your life?
I think everybody says this, but like, I have the best crew. One of the things that, as I'm thinking about like what got me through these seasons, was one of the things I wrote was like, let people help you, and also be brutally honest. And I've had an abundance of mentors. I've had an abundance of friends. You know who your people are when your whole life explodes and a lot of people don't want anything to do with you because you were literally acting crazy. The only people that are left are your ride or dies. And that is another gift that I got, was because all those fluffy relationships, oh honey, they ran far. There's forgiveness, there's redemption. We've talked, it's fine, but they were gone. And what was left was these crew of people that said, I'm with you no matter what, whether they were from college, whether they were family, whether they were mentors. They were people that linked arms with me the whole time in every moment. And I, again, another just pivotal moment in my recovery and my acceptance and my journey of learning how to live healthy with bipolar disorder was when I was on the phone with a friend and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Like, it's just too much. I just can't. I stop and she goes, well, the good thing is it's not your problem. It's our problem. And so you don't have to figure out how to do this because we're with you. And yeah, it is overwhelming. And yeah, it is too much, but you're not alone. You've never been alone. And all of us are going to stand with you. And every single person that has walked through that season with me has continued to walk through every season with me. They are the most devoted people. And when you lose your ish and people stay, they're never leaving.
Is there anything, when you think about your life, would you ever say like, gosh, if I could just go back and erase some of that stuff and not have that a part of my life, would you go back and do that?
Would I erase the assault? Yes, absolutely. That is evil. It is of the enemy. I said this at the conference we were at. The enemy tried to make sure I could never say a good word about Jesus ever again. Good thing I'm real stubborn. And God's real good. The assault I would erase. The diagnosis I would not. The struggles I would not. I wish this on no one. Spending 8 years in perpetual struggle, no. But the other side of it is the depth and the richness of how I know the Lord, who I know the Lord to be. When your life feels awful a lot, there's no kind words for you and Jesus. There's no nice platitudes. There's no, let's just read the Bible and it'll be fine. There is a lot of explicit words and a lot of yelling and a lot of tears. So I feel so close to the Lord because I can go to him and be like, you suck. I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want to be around you. You obviously don't like me. I don't care. Get away from me. And the Lord's like, it's okay. I'm still here. I love you. And I'm like, well, I don't love you. Like, conflict breeds intimacy. And I've had an astonishing amount of conflict with the Lord. So we are BFFs. I remember sitting at, again, look at this, the Shane and Shane Phillipcom concert just a few short months ago. I was by myself because my friend couldn't go last minute, and I'm in my 30s. I've been single for a long time. Not that I'm old, but my friends got married at 22. So I'm used to doing things on my own. It's fun. And I remember kicking back, like I got all the way up into the balcony and the back row. And I remember watching people praising the Lord during this concert as I just felt led to sit and just wanted to soak in it. And the image I kept getting in my mind the whole time was of God just sitting right next to me. Not me reaching for him, not me begging for his presence, which none of that is bad, but just him like I'm getting goosebumps, like him just sitting next to me and us kicking it back, being like, thanks God, thank you. And just that depth of relationship. Like, I say this a lot. I hate Christian cliches. I hate all those things because when life hits the fan, when crap hits the fan, none of those things hold up. But being with Jesus, following Jesus, that yes, I said when I was 16, like, worth it. Would do it all over again. Because I said yes, then God got to do whatever he wanted with my life. And it has been hard, but he has been so faithful that I did not know that life could be this beautiful and this peace-filled and this joyful. And it was hard. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing I've said during this podcast. But the goodness of the Lord is so heavy, and I can see all those puzzle pieces for all those years to where now I sit and I go, wow. And I hear the Lord go, and it can get better. And I'm like, it can get better. Well, dang, this is fantastic. And it, of course, doesn't mean that trials won't come and that heartbreak won't come and life is hard. But it's so much easier for me to turn to the Lord because of that repeated relationship and that repeated trust that's been built over years and years and years of going like, I'm really good at saying, God, I don't get it, but you're in it. So we're going to do it. And we always come out the other side and somehow you make good out of it. And we're just going to believe that you're going to do that again.
Beka, thank you so much for sharing. I love the imagery that you shared about just God sitting next to you, just resting with you. And he has been there through the whole journey. At least I feel that in my life, and it's beautiful to see in yours. And it's easy for us to take that for granted sometimes and not even recognize He has been there the whole time. Beka, thank you for being on the show. I loved all the imagery Beka shared, the 1,000-pound boulder she was trying to drag up this mountain, God just resting with her at that Phil Wickham concert. There are just so many ways God uses all the things in our life, that imagery that we have that pops up into our mind. He uses everything. Maybe you have been struggling with your mental health. Maybe this is the time that you can talk to a trusted professional. This has been something that I started this past June, finding a personal therapist, just to have the freedom to walk through those traps that we have set in our mind that have been there over the course of our lives. You also don't need to be in crisis to talk with a mental health professional. And if Beka's story impacted you, all of her info will be linked in the show notes at daniellezapchenk.com. For those of you that really want to dive into a time of reflection, here are 2 takeaway questions for you. Number 1, Beka talked about how conflict breeds intimacy. And I think that is so true. Whether it's in our faith, our relationships, our work-life balance, there's always going to be a sense of conflict. So what is that for you? And how is God using that to build intimacy? Number 2, Beka said cheering people on is free. It costs absolutely no money to do that. So let's take Beka's words into this next week with us and cheer on the tribes of people in our life for even the simplest of things. It makes a huge difference. And it's good to know that someone is there standing alongside you. Thank you guys so much for listening. I am so grateful to be able to do this podcast each and every week for you. So come follow me on Instagram or Facebook. That's at Danielle Zapchenk. That's Zapchenk. You could subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, whether on Apple, Spotify, or even on YouTube, and leave a rating or review. It really does help other people find out about the Parable podcast. And thank you to my technical producer of a husband, Eric Zapchenk, for editing this podcast today.
I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
That is going to do it. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Remember, your parable showcases a good God that was simply sitting right next to you the whole time. See you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.